you're suffering from stress, anxiety, lack of sleep, inflammation, pain management, kind of like I am pretty much all the time, I highly encourage you to check out cocanacare.com. And that's CO for Colorado. It's a Colorado-based company. Canna, C-A-N-N-A, care.com. They make incredible CBD oil that's derived from all natural, high-quality industrial hemp. It's legal in all 50 states and is USDA certified 100% organic. And there's absolutely no THC content in the oil. It's non-GMO and contains no heavy metals or pesticides. They've been gracious enough to help support us during this time. So if you're wanting to try CBD oil for any of those reasons I mentioned and a lot more on their website, I highly encourage you just to give it a shot. Check it out. Go to cocanacare.com. And again, that's CO for Colorado, C-A-N-N-A care.com.
I actually ran out of water, and I was probably without water for 6 hours. It was very dry. I was in New Mexico. I ended up consulting my maps, and I found where there's supposed to be a little stream when it's wet in the winter. And I found a big culvert pipe that had some water, and I ended up filtering some highly questionable water.
This is the Adventure Sports Podcast, where we hear stories of adventure from every corner of the planet. We interview all sorts of folks who are using their sport to explore the world around them and give you the inspiration you need to get out there and have some fun. Oh man, as you heard in the little snippet at the beginning, running out of water can make you do some questionable things. And in fact, I did that same route that Jim Goodyear did. This is a revisited episode, by the way, doing the Tour Divide, which is on the Great Divide mountain bike route. I did that quite a while ago, and I ran out of water too out in the desert. And I remember there, unfortunately, on the trail, there being a ton of trash. Literally looked like people just dumped their trash out. And inside that trash was a lot of water bottles. And I was so thirsty, so kind of desperate, I guess you could say. It had been about 5 or 6 hours in the sun without any water and still about 30 miles from town. And I was looking for water bottles out there in the trash to get some water because I was getting a little bit panicked. It was an area you could tell there wasn't going to be any other water source, and so I've been there. Haven't had to filter anything like that out, but we are covering this episode today talking about the Great Divide mountain bike route because a good friend of the show, Andy Stout, is out on the route right now, and he said he's been listening to the show, being inspired by it, and I just wanted to give him some practical, kind of really applicable advice about his route. He's out there in Montana or Idaho somewhere going south, and if you don't know, the Great Divide mountain bike route is the route, and there's a race every year on it called the Tour Divide, and obviously this year it's not happening just because of COVID and everything, but it runs from Canada to Mexico along pretty much the Continental Divide, very, very close to the hiking trail, but it's all the routes that bikes can do. And so it's incredible. It's about 2,800 miles. It changes every year as, little parts are added here and there. But overall, it's a really long, really incredible route and ends at the Mexican border if you're going south. But anyway, just wanted to shout out to Andy. If you remember Andy, he was on the show on episode, actually, let me check, 534, and he was just talking about bike tours and just kind of some of the adventures he's done. Great guy. He posts a ton to his Instagram stories specifically, so I highly encourage you, go follow him at StoutAbout on Instagram. He's posting about the adventure, and I can tell you already some of these images are just, it's gorgeous. So if you're not getting out there this year for whatever reason, maybe it's COVID, maybe it's something else, but I encourage you to check it out because he definitely makes you feel like you're there. So Andy, hope you're staying safe, man. Enjoy. And thanks for asking for some more inspiration because I chose this episode just for you. And so if you're out there and you want to do an adventure and maybe you want to hear a story from someone who's done your adventure before, reach out. We'd love to shout it out in the replayed episodes every Thursday. But anyway, we'll be coming at you on Monday with a brand new episode. Have a great weekend. Everybody stay safe. And keep getting out there and having fun.
The Tour Divide is over 2,700 miles of self-supported time trial endurance riding along the Great Divide mountain bike route stretching between Banff, Alberta, Canada, and the U.S.-Mexico border in Antelope Wells, New Mexico. The route was created in 1997 by the Adventure Cycling Association. For 19 years now, bikepackers have been tackling this route with top riders finishing in just over 2 weeks, while others don't make it at all. Jim Goodyear is on the show with us today to fill us in on the experience and the mental test that the Tour Divide provides. Jim, thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me, Travis. Happy to be here.
Yeah, I'm happy to have you. So, I recently learned about the Tour Divide, and I've become really intrigued with this ride. I didn't realize it existed. This is a self-supported ride in the sense that you absolutely can't have any help from anybody, not even people shipping stuff to you. I mean, you have to use commercial shippers. You have to use lodging and, and everything. You can't have a van pull up and basically allow you to sleep in it. Anything like that, right?
That's correct. I mean, this genre of racing is fairly new. It's self-supported racing. So the only thing you can use are commercially available services. So basically, you are racing and taking care of all of your issues in between supply points or these small towns. So you have to make sure you're carrying enough water, or you need to have enough ability to repair your bike, to carry enough food to get you to the next stop. So it's the logistics of this type of racing can add a lot of stress to what you're doing while you're out there on the Tour Divide.
Yeah, that's cool. I think that's the one thing that really drew me to the idea of it, because I've always, ever since I was a little kid, I always wanted to figure out some, logistically, sane way of packing stuff on a mountain bike and just going out for days on end, and essentially what bike packing has become. And then I saw that you guys do this 2,700 mile ride, essentially bike packing and supporting yourselves. I think it's such a cool idea.
It is. I think it's cool, but the practicality of it. I mean, I told my wife there was a time when I think I was attracting flies from 3 counties away, because I mean, you go without showering. You're carrying just a minimal amount of clothes. The only shoes I had were my cycling specific shoes. So I mean, you have one rain jacket, one base layer underneath that, and you're just going on the minimal amount to get you there. And you figure, when I started in Banff, it was, low 40s and raining for the first 2 days. My feet were wet constantly. By the time I finished 3 weeks later, 22 days later, Antelope Wells was 107 degrees. It was sweltering hot. So, I mean, there's a big swing in weather while you're riding the 2,700 miles, and you got to be able to prepare for all of that.
Yeah, no doubt. Well, I definitely wanted to bring up the weather fluctuations later in the discussion about it, because you just to be able to have to prepare for that kind of stuff and not have so much room to put stuff on, it's got to be very careful preparation.
That's right.
But let's back up and let's start with you and how it is you got into cycling. I think I read that it was an ACL replacement that basically kicked off your career, huh?
That's right. I grew up playing a lot of soccer, some baseball early on. And I was playing, I'm 48 years old. I was playing in some competitive men's leagues, and I eventually, in a pickup game, tore my ACL. So I figured that was pretty good to go that long without having a major knee injury. But part of my rehab, I owned a mountain bike, and I decided to just get on a trainer and start spinning. Eventually, I decided to hang up the soccer boots and start riding on the roads around North Texas, and found some clubs. And I never thought there would be a sport that would kind of satisfy my need for, just competition to really push myself. And then also at the same time, camaraderie, because I didn't see cycling as a team sport. Found a good team to work with in Cadence Cyclery here in North Texas. They own 3 shops here, and really took off. I just started doing some mountain biking, did the road races around Dallas area. And then a few years back, I'd seen this documentary called Ride the Divide. The Tour Divide is still considered an underground race. There's no formal sanctioning body. There's no entry fee at all. You have to pay a fee in order to have your GPS tracked, but it's still an underground race. And I saw this documentary called Ride the Divide, and all of a sudden that came back to me as I started cycling a lot. it was always in the back of my head, and decided that I was eventually going to, tackle this big epic adventure.
Yeah, and I read that, instead of a race being organized and taking entry fees, this is more of a community organized event where in reality, you can do this race, this time trial, any time of the year, assuming you're not trekking through a whole bunch of snow. You can do it north to south, south to north. You can do it any time of the year and register a time, right?
Correct. There is the second Friday in June is what they call the Grand Depart, and that takes you could take place at Banff or Antelope Wells. The vast majority are in Banff, so there's kind of this big party and send off, and most of the riders will ride at that time. But any time during the year, I couldn't do that because of some commitments. I decided to do an individual time trial. Some people say that's a little more risky, obviously. It's a little more challenging because there aren't any other riders around me.
Sure.
And I didn't see any other race. I saw one other racer heading northbound, finishing the day I took off. Other than that, I didn't see any other racers. So yeah, it's a honor system. When you decide to race it, you send a letter of intent to a gentleman and let you declare that you're going to abide by the rules. And it's self-policing for the most part, and you follow those rules. You do register. You have a spot tracker, so that allows people to see you on the route. It sends updates anywhere from 2.5 minutes to every hour where you are. So they make sure, the community makes sure you're staying on route. If you go off route, you have to pick the route up where you left it. So if you broke down or you needed to go off route to get supplies, you could see that. So there is a way to audit, that you followed the official Tour Divide route while you're out there. But yeah, I love the fact that it's kind of still has that underground status. I think it's getting more popular, so there's a lot more information out there. There are places online where you can get information on what the route's like at different sections. You can get good information on, bike setup, bike packing gear. So I think that the people that are doing it today do it based off. We have the benefit of a lot of people that have ridden this and raced this ahead of us.
Yeah, it seems like it's more of a ride for, of course you get bragging rights, but more of a ride for friends and just to basically ride against yourself and make sure that you can put up with it and compete and make it through the whole course.
Yeah, I think, I went into this, I knew I wasn't going to set a record. I mean, the record was 14 days. Prior to this year. This year, a gentleman set a new record at 13 days, 20 hours. So, I mean, those are some exceptional athletes out there. And I think most of the people that are racing it, I think there are probably around 170 that raced it this year. About 40 to 45% of those people they drop out, they don't finish. And I tell folks, I think the people that are racing this aren't necessarily racing it to win. We're racing it to see if we could finish. We're racing it, we're racing against weather. We're racing against, our own fears. We're racing to discover new things about ourselves. And I think that's the big appeal of this race and why people go out there and do it. And I think they're all ages. I mean, 60, 70-year-olds down to, early 20-year-old racers out there. So it covers a large demographic.
Yeah, definitely. Well, let's talk about the route itself. Back in 1997, I believe, is when it was first devised and then first ridden in 99, from what I read. It covers essentially the Continental Divide, Banff, Alberta, down through Montana, Idaho, Wyoming, Colorado, and New Mexico. There's some pretty grueling terrain in there. There's no doubt about that. So let's talk about your experiences on the trail. And obviously, like we're saying, we're overcoming, our mental challenge at the same time. So,
yeah, I think all my preparation. So I figure I spent about a year preparing for this. I was doing the normal race circuit in North Texas, which kept me in shape. But leading up to this, the 6 months prior, I was really preparing for a physical effort, which it was. I mean, it beats your body up. I mean, you're going without sleep. You're climbing. So I think they say the elevation gain is 200,000 feet of climbing, which is equivalent to climbing Mount Everest from the South Base Camp like 10 times. So I mean, I couldn't ride in North Texas for 5 years and probably get that kind of elevation and climbing. Now, if I lived in Colorado, maybe. But it's an insane amount of climbing, and not only the climbing, but I would look. So each day I got to a point where I'd look at my maps and kind of understand, okay, I'm going to try to go 150 miles today. What's that look like? And I'd look at the elevation. Okay, I have 3 big mountain passes all over 10,000 to 11,000 feet. And so you kind of set these goals. Okay, I got to conquer the first pass, the second, the third pass. But what you don't realize on top of that elevation gain is some of these roads are just impossible to ride. My bike and gear, my dry weight was probably around 46 pounds. With water and food, I was probably right at 50 pounds or over 50 pounds, I think. And you're going over just rocks that are impossible to ride on. So I don't know what the amount is, but I figure I hiked my bike. I pushed my bike probably up 20 miles worth of trail, I'd estimate. So a lot more walking than I thought I would be doing. And the first few days I did so much of that, my Achilles tendons I developed 2 knots on the back of my Achilles tendons because I was wearing racing mountain bike shoes, which are carbon fiber soles and absolutely no flex in them at all. So my Achilles tendons were taking the brunt of that, and I had to adjust my stride and shorten my stride. I probably would have chosen different shoes if I had known how much walking I was going to be doing, but it was miserable at times. And you're out there and you hate the trail. There are times when you absolutely hate that trail. And at the same time, you love what you're doing. You love the challenge. You're like, okay, my legs aren't strong enough to ride up this hill. You're going to walk me up this hill. So let's go, legs. And you just have to get up the hill.
Yeah, that was my first thought when you said you trekked up to 20 miles. I thought, in mountain bike shoes, and I use regular mountain bike shoes, more of a low top with cleats in it. But man, you're talking about a carbon fiber sole. Yeah, that gives no give, and you don't even know to train for that. Like, how do you train for hiking in rigid mountain bike shoes?
That's right. So that was something I wasn't quite ready for. That caught me by surprise.
Yeah, that's a good one to fall in the tips and tricks category there.
For sure. A lot of guys will tell you to buy shoes that are 1 or 2 sizes bigger just to account for the swelling that you're going to get. So I thought about that. I had some insoles. I could take them out if I had the edema or some of the swelling in my feet. I really didn't have a problem with that. But I just didn't think about the climbing and having a more a sole that flexed a little bit. Yeah,
no doubt. So let's talk about the terrain itself. This is predominantly off-road stuff, right?
Yes. There, you're on pavement going into some of these smaller or some of the larger towns. So there is some pavement, but the vast majority of the time you're in the wilderness, high mountain, high desert. You're on fire trails, gravel roads, some off-road trails. There were trails that were definitely designed for like motorcycles and off-road vehicles that we were riding on. But it's a series of trails that just connect. The Adventure Cycling Association has mapped it all out, and we follow that. And they're just, the beauty that you see out there. Now you're experiencing pain, and there were times when I was in the pain cave for days at a time, it felt like, but at the same time, I was enjoying the views because, I saw moose. I saw a badger. I saw a lot of cows out there, obviously grazing in the high country. Saw black bear, brown bear. Saw a lot of elk. So you're out there in the middle of nowhere, and sometimes the roads are good, and there are times when they're just the washboard is just miserable to ride on, and you have to ride on it.
Yeah, I'll bet the emotional swings are extreme highs and extreme lows, and probably many of those within the same 5 minutes.
Yeah, it is. I was saying that earlier. I prepared for this physical challenge, but I had no idea how mentally draining and the mental aspects and not just mental aspects, but when you're that tired and that fatigued and you're going that long, what happens is mentally you start getting weaker, and then that spirals into this emotional state where you're like a child and you're mad and you're angry, and it's like, you know, I'm the one that chose to do this. I know where the finish line is. So get control of yourself, Jim. So you have a lot of really good conversations with your handlebars while you're out there on the trail. But yeah, so what happens is there were 3 times where I rode 250 miles without stopping.
Wow.
You know, maybe an hour, and the next day I was worthless, and I should have known that. I pushed myself too hard, and then you pay for it the next day. But what happens is you just go hard physically, and then you get into this mental state where you're like a robot, and that's okay. But then you start making mistakes. Every year when the Grand Depart starts, there are some forums that they'll start a lost and found forum. And I was actually making fun of people this year. And I was showing my wife, I was reading all people leaving their phones and then saying, hey, any racers on this leg of the race, if you see a phone at this spot, try to pick it up and try to get it back. Or there was one woman who said she lost her phone and somebody found it. And then she said somebody had stolen her jacket and I think a sleeping bag. And it turns out she left her sweet roll open and things were just falling out along the route.
Oh, no.
And I was kind of laughing at that, making fun of that, but little did I know I would start doing similar things because you're so fatigued that you don't realize what you're doing. I'd lost my jacket twice. I lost a pair of Oakley sunglasses. I lost my pump. I lost a glove. I mean, so you just start making these mental mistakes when you're that fatigued and you're not eating, you're not getting the type of nutrition you're used to. You're not getting enough sleep. And, yeah, I saw that happen to me while I was out there.
Yeah, and that goes back to you talking about doing it on your own instead of part of the Great Depart, because you're out there and it's not like you're carrying spares of many things. I mean, maybe you have a pair of spare gloves, but not pumps, not phones, not that kind of stuff. So you start leaving that stuff, and you talk about being mentally exhausted. Now you're mentally exhausted and a little worried about your ability to survive out there.
That's it. I went 2 days without my pump. Now I do carry I carried 2 or 3 CO cartridges so I could still air up a tire. And I had 1 flat. So it's like you don't realize the drain and the stress that puts on you. So you're riding along. I realized I lost I didn't have my pump when I was repacking. I got a jacket or something and I realized my pump was gone. So what happens is you have to be real careful mentally that you don't go into a real negative place, because you're riding on this trail. It's beautiful. Your legs feel decent. You're going and you're like, what happens if this? I'm like, okay, I only have a couple CO cartridges. What if I run out of those? And you can go into a pretty dark place. And when you're that negative, it's hard to be real productive. And so you got to rein it back in and say, okay, I got 2 CO cartridges. I have 2 more spare tubes. I'm okay. And if that goes down, I'm going to have to do what they say and stuff my tube with grass and see if I can get to a place where I can repair it. But you got to really control yourself mentally in those types of situations. It's when you're doing an individual time trial, my fork started making some noise on a couple legs, and that's all I could think about. I'm like, okay, what happens if my fork breaks? Because I had a suspension fork. A lot of guys now are doing it with completely rigid bikes. No suspension in the back, no suspension in the front. I had a suspension fork and started making a lot of noise. And again, I probably wasted a lot of nervous energy worrying about that. And it got me through the race fine.
Yeah, I'll bet. That's interesting. They're doing it with rigid suspension now. Is that more for longevity, wear and tear on the bike during the trip?
I think they're doing it because it simplifies the bike, and they don't have to worry about a mechanical breakdown, and they're doing it for weight. Rigid fork's going to be a lot lighter. So it's all trying to get your bike and your kit down to the lowest amount of weight possible if you're going to be racing it. And there are I don't know how many there are a lot of people that will tour the Grand Divide. Particularly up kind of northern Colorado, a lot of people in Montana, and a lot of people in Canada. You see them bike packing, and they're carrying a lot of gear. We're talking 60, 70-pound bikes with big pannier racks and
Right.
camp stoves and coffee, and they all have gray smiles on their face because they're enjoying themselves. And I come up on them, and they know exactly, just by the look of my rig, they know that I'm built for speed. Uh, and so people can go out there and enjoy themselves, but there is something about racing it and pushing yourself to limits, and that's what I wanted to do, and that's what the 170 plus people did this year when they declared that they were going to race the Tour Divide.
Yeah, no, I totally get it. I would be the touring person with the the 150-pound outfit.
Yeah,
out there with a smile on my face.
I mean, there's something to that. I mean, I think doing an individual time trial, I stopped, and every time I ran into somebody that was touring, I tried to take a picture. I spent a couple minutes with them if they wanted to talk, and they were always, appreciative of that. But it would be nice to have a cup of coffee. I told my dad I'd love to go back and tour the Montana section with a fly rod.
Yeah.
Because I love to fly fish, and I could see myself just kind of riding, putting in some miles, and then just saying, you know what, that looks like a great stream, and then going, wetting a fly.
Oh yeah, sounds good to me. All right, let's talk about the bike itself. I mean, obviously these days, mountain bikes, or any bikes for that matter, can vary in such vast ranges. What is it you rode? You said it was rigid, so you didn't have any suspension. So, what is your bike, and how is it outfitted in order to carry the bare essentials but not be too heavy?
Right. So most people are riding hardtail mountain bikes. I rode a Scott Scale 910. That was the model. It had a Fox suspension fork. The weight of my bike is a carbon fiber bike. The weight of my bike with the pedals and no bags or anything was 24 pounds. And then what I did was I equipped that with what are called Jones Loop H bars. So it's a handlebar that gives me multiple positions. A lot of people use this handlebar setup for bike packing. And then on top of that, I put some aero bars to give me some even more, give me just different positions on the bike so that I could rest my shoulders or my back and allow me to keep going without any fatigue. So that was the basic bike setup. Then for the packs, what we usually do, anyone that's doing ultra racing, a seat bag is necessary. So it's a bag that hangs off of your seat and your seat post. And that carries a lot of the weight. That's where you're putting some of your tools, some of your clothing, your water. I had my water filtration system in there. Then I'll have a sweet roll that attaches to the front handlebar, so it looks like a roll, and that had my sleep system in it. So I had a sleeping bag, a bivy sack, and a tarp. Once I got to Helena, Montana, I sent the bivy home and just had a sleeping bag and a tarp. That's what I used the rest of the way. And then a frame pack. I held extra water in the frame pack. And then 2 little pouches on the top tube that carried things that I needed quick access to. Some of the tools that I was using quite a bit. I kept my phone in there. Kept extra batteries in there. And then there are 2 feed bags that I had that I just shoved food in, because one of the things that you actually get tired of eating on this route, and they were called, my bags were all made by Revelate, with the exception of the frame bag. And these mountain feed bags are kind of round, and they sit off to the side of on your handlebars, and you just shove them with food. And I was trying to consume between 12 and 15,000 calories a day. And so I was trying to eat every single hour, and you got to have food handy. And that's what I was doing. And then I had a small bag, a ultralight backpack that I was using. And I didn't want to carry a backpack, but I found that I was having to carry so much food that when I hit Steamboat Springs, I actually got a nicer Osprey backpack to carry more food and water, since I was doing some of the longer stretches in New Mexico where there was no water available. I just really needed